Hi, I'm Dr. Christy Mulkey, and I'm the workshop coordinator for 240 Tutoring. Today, I'm bringing you part 3 in our 4-part series on English language arts, writing, and grammar conventions. Let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with you so that it's very easy for you to follow along, and you can take notes as you need to. Now, again, this is part of a series, and today we're going to be focusing on commas. If you missed parts 1 and 2 in this series, I highly suggest you go check those out. They were on sentence structure and punctuation. Part 4, which is coming later this week, is on teaching grammar to English language learners. Now, if you're wondering, is this content on my test? You can look at this chart and quickly see it's on several elementary, general knowledge, ELA, subject-specific test, and even that ESL and ESOL test. So let's talk about commas. Commas are used to separate words, phrases, or clauses and to provide clarity within sentences. Now, today we're going to be looking at the top 10 uses of commas. So our first use is in compound sentences. When you have two independent clauses that are joined by a coordinating conjunction, use a comma before that conjunction. So in this example, Jeremiah went to football practice and his brother stayed home sick. So we have Jeremiah went to football practice and his brother stayed home sick, two independent clauses, and they're joined by a coordinating conjunction, the word and. When you see that, we're going to put a comma before that coordinating conjunction. Same thing in the next sentence. I like cheese and ranch dips, but cheese dip is my favorite. Two independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction, so that comma comes before the word but. You can also use commas in compound complex sentences. So in this example, though Erin prefers watching comedy movies, she watched the newest thriller movie and she enjoyed it very much. We also use commas in subordinate clauses. So when a subordinate clause comes at the beginning of a sentence, it should be set off from the main clause with a comma. So when I was cooking dinner, the smoke alarm went off. So we have the subordinate clause, when I was cooking dinner, and the main clause, the smoke alarm went off. Now, since that subordinating clause is at the beginning of the sentence, we put a comma behind it to set it off. Now, if we reverse this sentence, the smoke alarm went off when I was cooking dinner, that subordinate clause is now at the end, and you would not need a comma in that sentence. So we use a comma with subordinate clauses when it's at the beginning of the sentence. Another use of commas is when we have introductory words or phrases. So if your sentence starts with 2 or more prepositional phrases, then set them off with a comma. In the closet, on the top shelf, a spider built a cobweb. So we have 2 prepositional phrases in the closet. On the top shelf, 2 or more, we set them off with a comma. We can also use a comma when starting with transition words or phrases, but I will say this rule is subject to author preference, so beware of that. But we can say first, comma, heat the oven, then, comma, she mixed the ingredients. We also use commas with a direct address. So we want to set off a person's name or title. So we're directly addressing that person's name or a title. Then we use a comma. Did you enjoy dinner, Ashley? So we put a comma to set off that name. Now we have the name at the beginning. Glenn, comma, finish your homework. We also use commas in parts of a list. So anytime we want to separate words in a list or a series, we're going to do that with commas. So in this example, Marquise picked up his shoes, hat, glove, and bat from the locker room. So we separate all those things in that series or that list with a comma. Now, I want to make a note about the Oxford comma. The Oxford comma is the comma before the and or before the conjunction. There is some debate about whether that's necessary. So it's generally accepted that you can do it either way. You can put that Oxford comma in, the one before the conjunction, or you can leave it out. So in this example, Marquise picked up his shoes, hat, glove, and bat from the locker room. So you notice there's no comma before and. Now, sometimes that Oxford comma can come in handy when part of the list is compound. So in this example, at lunch, we ate tortillas, fajitas, chips and salsa, and tacos. Since those chips and salsa are compound, they go together, we're going to go ahead and put in that comma before the and. We can also use commas to eliminate confusion or just ensure that the reader is following the sentence. So in this example, the issue is, comma, students are not following directions. We also use commas in non-essential phrases. So this is basically going to be a phrase within the sentence that is not necessary for the sentence to retain its meaning. So in this example, Mr. Martinez, the science teacher, was promoted to assistant principal. We can remove that phrase within those commas and the sentence retains its meaning. Mr. Martinez was promoted to assistant principal. So this right here would be considered a non-essential phrase. So if we have one of those, we set it off with commas. So a comma before and after in this case. Now, there are some times where the phrase is essential, but it sounds kind of similar. So look at this example. Mr. Smith, the science teacher, has lunch at 12:30. Since Mr. Smith is a pretty common name, we actually are using this phrase, the science teacher, to identify which Mr. Smith we're referring to. So in this case, we have to have that phrase in order to know which Mr. Smith. So it's essential and thus has no commas. So we use commas with non-essential phrases. We also use commas with sequential adjectives. So just like we had a list of nouns that we separated with commas, we can list adjectives and separate them with commas. So Chris wants to buy the new black 4-wheel drive extended cab 4-door truck at the front of the car lot. So we have that list of adjectives and we are separating them with commas. Now our last two uses, we can use commas to punctuate addresses or numbers. So in this case, we're using that number to separate 43,568, comma right there between the thousands and hundreds place. We can use it with an address or a location. So Tyler, comma, Texas, we're separating the city and state. We can use it in dates, as you see here. We can use it for ages. So my son, 2, still likes to take naps. So his age is 2, and we separate that with commas. We can also use commas to punctuate titles. So Mark Rogers, DDS, donates time to the local shelter. So we're using commas to set apart that title. Lastly, we use commas in direct quotations. So if we need to separate a direct quotation from the rest of the text, we do that with a comma. So in this sentence, he hit me is the direct quotation. To separate that from the rest of the text, we use a comma. Now that we've looked at the top 10 uses of commas, let's try a practice question. So this says, which of the following is correct? A, when the game was over, Julius rode the bus home with his parents. B, Susan, go to bed. C, the family went to Destin, Florida for vacation. D, Sheldon exclaimed, I don't want to go to the store today. Now I'm going to tell you a common mistake with this type of question is most of our certification tests are timed and people get in a hurry and they read this and they go, oh, A does not sound correct. It's missing something. So that's the answer. Oh, big mistake. It's looking for what is correct. So be sure you note that. We're looking for which one is correct. And we're going to go ahead and note these. So let's look at A. When the game was over, Julius rode home with his parents. When the game was over is a subordinate clause. And if you were just listening, you learned when a subordinate clause is at the beginning of the sentence, we need a comma after it. So we are missing a comma right here. B, so A is not correct because they were looking for the correct one and it has an error. All right, keep that in mind. It can be confusing. B, Susan, go to bed. Susan is a direct address. We're addressing Susan directly. So we need a comma after it. Susan, comma, go to bed. So B is also not correct. C, the family went to Destin, Florida for vacation. This is correct. We're setting apart the city and the state with a comma. That is correct. Let's go ahead and check D just to be on the safe side. Sheldon exclaimed, I don't want to go to the store today. You see that direct quotation. We need to set it apart from the rest of the text with a comma. All right, so I hope that practice question helped you just a little bit. It's all about reading carefully. Now, I want you to be on the lookout for the last video in the series, and if you missed parts 1 and 2, go back and look for those. You can find them on all of our social media. I encourage you to check out our study guides and all the resources we have available on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. If you have any questions about this video, drop them in the comments. We do watch those questions, or you can email us at workshops@240tutoring.com. Again, I'm Dr. Christy Mulkey with 240 Tutoring, and I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you.